The crowd moved, but their eyes lingered. Harris felt each glance like a small weight, pressing against his back, his chest. The street smelled of exhaust, fried food, and wet asphalt. Sirens echoed faintly, distant yet sharp. He kept his pace, steady. Step, step, step. No sudden movements. Every step a statement of presence. A man on the corner muttered something under his breath. Harris didn't turn. A woman paused, hand on her stroller, eyes flicking sideways, cautious, curious. Detective. "Harris?" a voice called. Not confrontational, just curious. "Yes," he replied, keeping his gaze forward, his voice quiet, steady. You're the one?" Harris nodded once. Silence hung between them. Even the cars seemed to slow, as if listening. His mind wandered briefly to the dozens of times this street, this neighborhood, had judged. Him silently. Microaggressions stacked like bricks, invisible but heavy. Each look carried a story he had learned to carry alone. He passed a cafe where two baristas whispered, hands hovering over the register. The tension didn't break, didn't need to. Observing was enough. A bicycle bell rang sharply behind him. He didn't flinch. Step, step, step. Control was a quiet weapon. Someone coughed, another shuffled feet. The weight of attention grew, almost tangible. Harris felt it pressing against him, and yet he felt calm. A strange duality, under scrutiny but in command of himself. He approached the intersection. A pause. He glanced briefly at the cop across the street. Recognition flickered, hesitation, something unsaid. Harris exhaled, slow, deliberate. Step, step, step. The street was still, but everything had shifted. Small, unseen, significant. "Hey! You! Stop right there!" Harris slowed, keeping his hands visible, calm. He recognized the voice immediately, the tone sharp, commanding. "Step aside. I need to see some ID." Harris nodded slightly. "I'm a detective." "Harris, badge," he said, reaching inside his coat. The cop's eyes narrowed, unconvinced. "You look like the description. Stop pretending." Harris's jaw tightened for a fraction of a second. He kept his voice even. "I'm not pretending. I'm here on duty." The officer's hand rested on his holster. Harris noticed it. Not aggressive yet, but loaded with assumption. His mind flickered to all the times he'd been stopped for the same reason, judged before explanation. "You sure?" the cop asked, voice low, almost accusing. "I'm certain," Harris said, producing his badge slowly, deliberately. "Detective Harris, City PD, same badge you'd see any day on the job." The cop blinked, a twitch in his face. He glanced around, as if the passers-by might confirm or deny him. Nobody intervened. Nobody moved. Harris's internal reflection was brief, sharp, the quiet power of restraint, the strength it gave him against assumptions like these. "Badge." "Right," the officer muttered, almost to himself. He swallowed, uneasy. I didn't." Harris didn't finish him. He didn't need to. Silence stretched, heavier than any words could be. The cop stepped back, shifting weight, unsure. Harris straightened, hands unclenched, and started to move again. The street felt smaller, the scrutiny more acute, but he carried himself without flinch. Control had shifted quietly, almost invisibly. Step. "Aside. I need ID." Harris didn't move. His hand rested lightly on his coat pocket. The badge was visible, metal catching the faint sunlight. "I've shown it," he said, voice low, calm. "Detective Harris, City PD." The cop stared, his brow furrowed, jaw tightening. I don't know. You just look like someone else." Harris's chest tightened for a fraction of a second. He inhaled slowly. "I don't. I'm here on duty." The officer shifted, 1 foot back, uncertain. "Look, I have to—" "Do what?" Harris asked softly. Assume? Judge? Arrest before knowing? The cop swallowed. His fingers twitched near the holster. The world around them seemed to pause. Footsteps slowed, engines idled, eyes flicked from the confrontation. It's just the description, the officer mumbled, voice trailing. Descriptions aren't excuses, Harris said quietly, eyes level, calm. You have a responsibility, not assumptions. A car horn blared. Harris didn't flinch. He felt the weight of history pressing on him. Every stop, every whispered accusation, every glance that questioned his place. The officer's mouth opened, closed. Hesitation stretched like rope between them. Harris felt the tension, but he held his stance. Restraint was power now. Finally, the cop stepped aside. Not a word more. He avoided eye contact. Harris nodded once, barely noticeable, and continued forward. The street seemed unchanged, yet the balance had shifted. A quiet authority replaced assumed control. One small act, calm, deliberate, reshaping the space without shouting, without anger. Silence lingered, heavy, unbroken, powerful. Harris walked, on, badge tucked under his coat, heart steady but mind racing. "Detective Harris," a voice muttered from a parked car. He didn't turn. The tone was familiar, an edge of doubt, suspicion unspoken but heavy. He remembered. The parking lot last month. The store clerk who followed him with eyes that said, "You don't belong here." The dispatcher who minimized a complaint he filed. Every small dismissal, every whispered assumption, stacking like invisible bricks. "You okay?" a colleague asked once, nervously, as they passed him at the precinct. Harris had only nodded, quietly carried it all. A flashback flickered. Another stop. An officer's voice low but accusing. "Do you have your ID?" The question, routine. For others, always loaded for him. He felt the weight again now, heavier. Not just this cop, not just this street. It was the history, layered over years, pressing down with every glance, every murmur. "You always handle it." "So calmly," another voice had said. They didn't know. They couldn't. Calm was a shield, a method, a statement. Restraint meant survival dignity, meant persistence. The cop across the street shifted, unaware. Harris recognized the familiar patterns, the hesitation, the unease. Assumptions built into a system, now visible in a single pause, a stammered word. "Enough assumptions," Harris muttered to himself, barely audible. Silence answered, heavier than any voice. His feet moved forward, deliberate. Eyes scanning, mind calculating. The weight remained, but he had learned to carry it with authority. Quiet, undeniable. Every whisper, every glance that once cut him down, now framed the space. He claimed it not with anger, but with composure, letting the silent truths do the work the world had refused to acknowledge for too long. Harris walked past the storefronts, badge still visible beneath his coat. He sensed the eyes. A woman a coffee cart paused mid-sip, glanced down the street, whispered something to her friend. They stopped. "Him?" the friend murmured. Harris's jaw tightened briefly. He had learned to read these small reactions, subtle confirmations that the world noticed, that assumptions were cracking. The cop shifted weight, fingers brushing the holster, eyes darting toward the murmurs. "Keep moving," he muttered, more to himself than Harris. A man on the corner tilted his head, watching. "Is he really a cop?" he whispered to no one in particular. Harris didn't respond. He didn't need to. Each whisper, each glance, stacked quietly in the air like invisible weights. The street held them, breathing slowly, watching. Maybe I misjudged," the officer said, voice small, uncertain. He avoided eye contact, glanced at the pedestrians. Silence pressed, confirming what words could not. Authority alone didn't define truth. Harris felt the shift in the space. Not loud, not dramatic. Subtle, like water moving around a stone. He exhaled slowly. A group of teenagers paused at the corner, phones out, capturing a moment they didn't fully understand but instinctively felt was unusual. Harris walked past, composed, steady. The cop trailed a step behind, hesitant. "Detective, the officer began, but the words fell into the quiet. No one interrupted, no one defended. Harris glanced briefly, nodding almost imperceptibly. The authority had shifted. Not violently, not openly, but undeniably. Pedestrians whispered, silence spoke, and the invisible ledger of power quietly rebalanced. Harris continued walking, each step echoing restraint, dignity, and the small, potent force of quiet justice. The cop's hand trembled slightly as he reached for his radio, then paused, caught by the glint of Harris's badge. I didn't know," he muttered, voice low, uncertain. Harris kept his gaze steady, unflinching. "You do now," he said quietly, letting the words settle in the space between them. The officer swallowed, eyes darting to the sidewalks. People had stopped walking, some whispering, others staring. Every glance felt like a mirror reflecting his assumptions, the silent weight of years he'd never questioned. "I thought," he began, but the sentence faltered, broken by hesitation. "You thought wrong," Harris replied, calm, precise. His tone wasn't accusatory. It was firm, leaving room for acknowledgement without anger. A taxi passed slowly, brakes squealing, as if the city itself mirrored the tension. Pedestrians shifted uneasily, some recording on phones, capturing a moment that would speak louder than any argument. I didn't realize," the officer tried again, voice cracking under the pressure of recognition. Harris shook his head almost imperceptibly. "It's not about realization. It's about respect. Treat people as they are, not as you assume." The cop's jaw tightened, hands clenched. Silence stretched longer than any sentence could. His authority, once unquestioned, now felt fragile. Every micro-expression of those watching highlighted his internal collapse. I'll be more careful," he whispered, almost to himself. Harris nodded slightly. The street remained quiet, heavy with the shift. No applause, no confrontation, just the weight of understanding settling in. As Harris turned to continue walking, the officer lingered, eyes fixed on the badge, realizing that acknowledgement without action was nothing, and that the city had witnessed. A moment too quiet to ignore, yet too loud to forget. Harris's gaze softened slightly as the street around him blurred. Memories flickered. An empty parking lot, a colleague muttering under his breath, a supervisor dismissing a written complaint. The repetition of assumption, the silence that followed each accusation, pressed on him even now. "I remember this one," he murmured under his breath, almost to himself. The officer glanced at him. "What was that?" "Nothing," Harris said, voice low but steady. "Just old mistakes that never got addressed." The cop shifted uneasily. I didn't know." "You didn't have to," Harris replied, eyes fixed forward. "But now you see it. That's what matters." A nearby pedestrian coughed, glancing away, leaving the street heavier with observation. Harris's hand brushed against his badge, instinctively, a reminder of authority earned, not assumed. "I've seen a lot like this," the officer whispered, almost ashamed. "Stops, remarks, microaggressions I never thought mattered." Harris's voice was calm but firm. "They always matter, even the small ones. They stack. They shape the way people like me walk through this city every day." "I didn't realize..." The officer's words faltered, cracking under the weight of recognition. "You're realizing now?" Harris said. "Don't let it be just words. Actions speak longer than apologies." The silence stretched between them, heavy, unbroken. Each memory Harris carried, each ignored complaint, felt present, shaping the moment. The officer's shoulders slumped slightly, the first real sign of vulnerability. Maybe I can do better," he muttered, voice small. Harris nodded once, deliberately. No fanfare, no raised voices, just acknowledgement. The past lingered, but for the first time, it met understanding in the present, quietly reshaping what authority meant on these streets. "Are you sure we need to file this?" one internal affairs officer asked, voice low, eyes flicking toward the closed door. "We have to," another replied, fingers drumming nervously on the desk. "But you know how this goes. Reports vanish, complaints get buried." A soft knock interrupted them. The door creaked, and a reporter stepped in, notebook held like armor. "Excuse me, I heard something." "You heard nothing," the senior officer cut in sharply. "This conversation stays in this room." The reporter swallowed. People need to know. They need to see that someone is accountable." "Accountable?" The officer's tone was incredulous. "You think anyone moves fast in this city when it comes to protecting their own?" A pause. The hum of the air conditioning filled the space. Each second stretched. Internal affairs exchanged glances, fear, hesitation, and the faintest trace of resolve. "We need to be careful," one whispered. "Every word we write, every move we make, it's being watched. And if we step wrong—" "I know," the senior officer murmured, exhaling slowly. "But doing nothing is worse. You can't just pretend these reports don't exist. The city doesn't change on its own." The reporter jotted notes, voice barely audible. "So, you'll file it? Eventually?" "Eventually," the officer replied, shoulders stiff. "We're filing it, but it moves in shadows, quietly, slowly, so that the people above don't notice until it's already done." Silence returned, heavy and expectant. Words lingered between them like unspoken warnings. Each knew the stakes, the system's protection of power versus the faint, fragile hope that justice might slip through, even if only in whispers behind closed doors. "Why didn't you—" "Push back," a young officer whispered as Harris leaned against the wall, badge glinting faintly under the streetlight. "Push back?" Harris's voice was calm, even, carrying the weight of years. Would it have changed anything? Would it have made their assumptions vanish? The officer shook his head, eyes wide. "But don't they deserve it? Don't they need to see the cost of their arrogance?" Harris let silence answer. Each word unspoken held more force than any argument. "Sometimes restraint speaks, louder than confrontation," he murmured. "You mean, just take it?" The officer pressed, voice hesitant. "Let them walk over you?" Harris's gaze sharpened, steady and unwavering. "Not take it. Endure it with clarity, with dignity. Every reaction measured, every pause intentional. That is resistance too." A car honked nearby. Passers-by moved unaware, their indifference both shielding and isolating him. Harris's hands unclenched slowly. "If I raise my voice now, it becomes their narrative, not mine. My calm, my presence. That's the truth they can't rewrite." The officer exhaled slowly. I think I understand." "Understand that this isn't weakness," Harris said quietly. "It's strength shaped by experience. It's the courage to remain whole when the world insists you fracture." A bus rumbled past, muffling the soft click of Harris's badge against his chest. "Every moment of composure," he continued, "every decision to stand without aggression. It leaves a mark, one they can't erase, one they can't control." The young officer nodded. "Then, The calm is your voice. Yes, Harris said, his eyes sweeping the quiet street. The calm is the voice that survives, the voice that changes the story without shouting it aloud. I didn't think, the officer began, voice catching mid-word. His hands twitched at his sides, fingers brushing the gun belt nervously. You didn't think what? Harris asked softly, tone steady but firm, holding the calm that had carried him through years of scrutiny. That you'd... The officer faltered, gaze dropping to the concrete. I mean, you're an officer, right? I just assumed... Harris's lips pressed together. He didn't interrupt. The silence let the officer's own words weigh heavier than any reprimand. You assumed I wouldn't be? Harris finished for him, voice quiet. Each word deliberate, leaving space for reflection. The officer swallowed hard, blinking rapidly. I guess I never considered... That assumption, Harris said, holding his gaze, wasn't harmless. It shaped how you treated me, how you looked at me, and how this whole street, this whole city looks at people like me. I see that now, the officer whispered, voice trembling. I didn't realize... Harris let the pause stretch, letting the weight of acknowledgement sink in. Understanding comes late sometimes. What matters is what you do next. A distant siren echoed, blending with the rustle of pedestrians moving quietly past. The officer's shoulders sagged, tension bleeding out slowly. I don't know if I can fix it, he admitted. You can start, Harris replied. Start by recognizing, start by listening, start by checking the assumptions you carry. The officer nodded, eyes lowered, jaw tight. The city hummed around. Them, indifferent, yet somehow watching. Harris stepped back slightly, giving space, letting the subtle shift in authority, earned through calm and dignity, settle into the quiet street. The officer exhaled, finally meeting Harris's eyes. I understand. Harris inclined his head once, a small acknowledgement that the balance had begun to tip, silently, without a single raised voice. A phone buzzed in the crowd. Harris noticed it flicker, held high by someone half hidden. Near the corner. Are you recording this? Harris asked, voice calm, measured. The young man hesitated, thumb hovering. I think I should, he admitted, eyes darting nervously between Harris and the trembling officer. Harris nodded once, slowly, as if granting permission. Make it count. Not for outrage, so people see what happens when assumptions rule. The officer's gaze snapped to the phone, tension thickening. Wait, why would anyone... he muttered, voice faltering. They need to see, Harris replied quietly, letting the weight of those words hang. Not just for you or me, but for the streets, the city, for everyone who's been ignored. The recording continued, capturing subtle gestures, the officers shaking hands, the quiet composure in Harris's stance, the bystanders' shifting expressions. People are watching, the officer whispered, almost to himself, voice breaking. They'll see what I did, what I assumed. Yes, Harris said softly, gaze steady. And that's the point. Seeing opens understanding. Denial hides nothing here. The crowd murmured, whispers passing from one to another, small, acknowledgments of recognition. Phones clicked, a gentle hum of attention spreading outward. It could change things, the officer said, voice low, uncertain. Harris allowed a faint nod. It can, but only if you let it teach you, not scare you. The young man lowered his phone for a moment, then raised it again, capturing the tension, the recognition, the fragile authority slowly shifting. The city seemed to hold its breath, small movements of realization passing between strangers. And as the recording spread, Harris felt the quiet victory of restraint ripple outward. Justice witnessed, authority questioned, the unseen weight of assumptions slowly exposed. The crowd shifted subtly, a few nods here, a sideways glance there. Harris remained still, badge clipped, hands relaxed. You don't understand," the officer stammered, voice low, almost pleading. I thought I had authority. I was following procedure." Harris's eyes met his, steady and unwavering. "Authority isn't assumed," he said quietly. "It's earned, and it doesn't excuse ignoring the person in front of you." A colleague approached, glancing at Harris with hesitation. We saw it," she said softly, voice almost a whisper. "The recording, the way it happened." Harris inclined his head slightly. "Recognition matters. But more than recognition is accountability. You choose what comes next." The officer's hands trembled, fingers tightening around his belt. I don't know how to fix this," he admitted, almost to himself. "Start by listening," Harris replied. "Start by seeing. Restraint isn't weakness, it's a statement." A murmur moved through the gathered pedestrians. Phones shifted in hands, whispers growing. The crowd wasn't loud, but it was present, small confirmations of attention that weighed more than words. You'll face this?" the officer asked, voice uncertain, eyes darting to peers. "Yes," Harris said simply. "And you will too, if you choose to. The system moves slow, but the truth finds cracks." The officer exhaled, shoulders slackening slightly. I understand, maybe. I don't want to be that person again." Harris's gaze softened just enough. "Then begin. That's all it takes." Around them, subtle shifts happened. Colleagues exchanged glances, pedestrians paused in recognition, the hum of the city carrying a quiet ripple. Power wasn't shouted. It was reclaimed through calm, dignity, and the persistent insistence that justice, even in small acts, matters. Harris stepped forward, hands clasped in front, voice steady. The room fell silent, every eye on him. "You've seen the recording," he began. "You've heard the whispers. The pattern isn't new. It's repeated. Assumptions made, dignity dismissed, authority misapplied." A senior officer shifted uncomfortably in his seat. We were reviewing protocol," he said, voice strained. Harris shook his head slightly. "Protocol doesn't justify prejudice. It doesn't excuse hesitation to see a human being first." The officer at the center of the complaint avoided Harris's gaze. His fingers twitched, a pen dropping unnoticed to the floor. "You're aware," Harris continued, "that these microaggressions accumulate. They're small, almost invisible, but they're always felt. They shape how people move through life, how they trust systems, how they hope for fairness." A reporter leaned forward, scribbling notes rapidly. "Are you suggesting systemic failure?" she asked. Harris's eyes swept the room, calm yet commanding. "I'm not suggesting. I am stating, and the evidence isn't hidden, it's right there." He gestured to the screen, the clip looping silently behind him. A colleague whispered almost to herself, "It's clear. All of it." The officer's jaw tightened, eyes darting to peers for reassurance. None came. The weight of the video, the public's attention, and the undeniable truth pressed in. "I am asking," Harris said quietly, "for accountability, for recognition, for the courage to begin change." Silence stretched, unbroken, thick and heavy. The room exhaled collectively, acknowledging a shift impossible to ignore. Even without shouting, Harris's words struck hard, revealing a fracture that had been long ignored. The officer swallowed, lips pressed tight. I understand," he muttered, voice barely above the hum of tension, his confidence shattered. The officer shifted in his chair, fingers brushing nervously against his badge. I didn't mean... Harris didn't interrupt. He watched, calm, letting the words struggle to find their place. You have to understand, the officer stammered. It's not... Harris leaned forward slightly. Understand what? That your assumptions cost someone their dignity? A murmur ran through the room. Colleagues exchanged uneasy glances. The officer swallowed hard, lips pressing tight. I was following procedure. Procedure doesn't excuse bias, Harris said evenly. And your hesitation, your doubt, your words, they all mattered. They all left a mark. The officer looked down, hands shaking, pen clattering to the floor, a whisper from the back. He's breaking. I see it, Harris continued quietly. How the small, unchecked moments add up. How the silence of authority can become violence. Do you see it? The officer's voice faltered, rising in panic, then trailing off. His gaze darted, seeking validation from peers. None came. Harris's eyes remained steady. It's not too late to acknowledge it, to change, to bear the weight of what's been overlooked. The officer leaned back, trembling slightly. I didn't realize... Harris's voice softened, controlled. Realization isn't enough. Action is. Restraint is not weakness. It's understanding the power you hold and how easily it can harm. The room seemed to hold its breath. Every small movement, the dropped pen, the stifled coughs, the shifting chairs, marked the subtle collapse of an assumed authority. The officer exhaled sharply, nodding once, almost imperceptibly. I'll try. I see it now. Silence fell heavy and unbroken. Harris didn't respond. The authority had shifted without confrontation. The weight of truth hung between them, palpable and unyielding. The room remained heavy with silence, each gaze lingering on Harris. He adjusted his jacket calmly, hands steady. You've made your point, the officer muttered, voice low, trembling at the edges. I see it now. Harris didn't respond immediately. He let the words settle, the weight of recognition. Pressing against the air, a colleague shifted, whispering under her breath. He handled that. Perfectly. Harris finally spoke, quiet but clear. It's not about proving anyone wrong. It's about acknowledging what's been ignored, about choosing dignity over anger, every time. The officer looked down, nodding slightly, lips pressed tight. No one offered reassurance. No one moved to intervene. From the back, another voice murmured, hesitant. We need to reconsider our practices. Harris's gaze swept the room. This isn't about me. It's about making space for truth, for accountability. Small acts accumulate. Choices matter. That's where change begins. A soft cough. The cop exhaled, defeated, slowly rising. I'll step out, he whispered, almost apologetic, avoiding eye contact. Harris watched him leave. The air shifted as if a tension had lifted. Conversations, once hushed, began to murmur, eyes meeting with recognition. Pedestrians outside, catching snippets through the open window, nodded silently, a ripple passing unnoticed but meaningful. Harris's lips curved slightly, not in triumph, but in acknowledgement of the moment. Integrity doesn't need noise, he said softly, more to himself than anyone else. The room seemed lighter, awareness settling in. The authority that relied on fear had faltered, replaced by quiet dignity. Harris remained composed, his restraint radiating strength, teaching without shouting, leaving behind a room and a system slightly altered, slightly wiser. And when he finally stepped out, no applause, no fanfare, only the subtle weight of moral power reclaimed, his presence still felt long after the officer's retreat. Harris stepped into the precinct, the air lighter, though tension still lingered like a half-remembered storm. A clerk looked up, hesitated, then muttered, "Morning, sir." His tone carried caution, respect threading through the usual indifference. Harris nodded once. "Morning," he replied, voice steady, calm. Nearby, two officers exchanged a glance, barely audible. "Did you see the footage?" One whispered. The other shook his head slowly. "Yeah, hard to ignore. Makes you think." Harris passed without comment, but internally he noted each subtle change, the softening in tone, the careful steps, the avoidance of brusque commands. A senior colleague approached, lowering his voice. I wanted to say, the way you handled that, it mattered. People are talking, even the brass." Harris gave a brief nod, eyes scanning the room. "It's not about recognition," he said quietly. "It's about accountability. Every small choice we make. If we act with restraint, with honesty, it ripples. That's how the system shifts, quietly, through those willing to carry truth without noise." The colleague swallowed. "I guess we're learning." Outside, a journalist leaned against the frame, camera untouched, voice low. "There's more coverage today, subtle pieces, focusing on policy, not spectacle. It's unusual." Harris allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Subtle changes are stronger than headlines. They last longer." A young officer nearby straightened, whispering to a peer, "We might actually reconsider some protocols. Step back, think differently." Harris watched them, feeling the weight of restraint he had carried now mirrored in others' cautious acknowledgement. Small apologies, measured conversations, awareness rippling silently. It wasn't loud, it wasn't immediate, but it was change. And as he stepped out into the quiet city streets, Harris realized that the soft shifts, the hushed recognitions, were proof that calm integrity left marks deeper than any raised voice ever could. The precinct felt unusually quiet. Phones buzzed unanswered on desks. Officers passed the cop, faces rigid, eyes deliberately averted. He lingered by the coffee machine. "Hey," he started, voice low, unsure. No one responded. He shifted, cleared his throat. Anyone need a hand?" A young officer glanced briefly, then looked away. We're fine." He swallowed, gripping his mug tightly. The tremor in his hand betrayed nerves he had rarely admitted. Across the room, Harris walked past, calm, composed. He offered a nod, but nothing more. The cop's gaze followed him, weighing the dignity in Harris's measured pace. Later, a text. Message arrived. He opened it. Silence. Nothing. Another ping. Empty. "Guess people really are talking," muttered a colleague near the doorway, barely audible. The cop's jaw tightened. "Talking about me?" The colleague avoided eye contact. "About accountability. About choices." He turned abruptly, pacing, muttering under his breath. I didn't think." A senior officer intervened, voice quiet but firm. "You'll need to reflect. The department's watching, the public is watching. Silence won't save you." He nodded stiffly, but his hands shook. Every glance, every whisper seemed magnified. The weight of isolation pressed in, the solitude of privilege unmasked. Outside, Harris stepped through the doors, shoulders straight, voice steady. "Sometimes dignity isn't loud," he said softly, more to himself than anyone else. "It's quiet, and it changes things." The cop lingered in the empty precinct, staring at the door through which Harris had exited. No words came, only the ache of being unseen, unheard, and finally accountable. In the stillness, the cost of unchecked assumptions settled over him like a shadow he could no longer shake. Harris leaned back in the chair by the window, a pile of old case files stacked, neatly on the desk. Outside, the city hummed quietly, oblivious to most, but slowly, patterns were shifting. A colleague approached cautiously. "Harris, people are noticing. Small things, protocols, complaints being handled differently." He nodded slowly, eyes still on the skyline. "It doesn't happen all at once," he said softly. "Change rarely does. But it happens." The colleague shifted, hesitant. "Even the department, even public perception." "Yes," Harris replied. "Silence, restraint, measured truth. They're loud in their arrogance, but quiet dignity. It lingers longer." A reporter peeked through the doorway, voice hushed. "The viral clip, people keep asking. You didn't shout, you didn't confront, but it's still reaching them." Harris offered a brief, calm smile. "You don't need to raise your voice to be heard. You need consistency, integrity, and patience." The colleague exhaled almost as if a weight had lifted. "It's remarkable. The way it's sticking. Even the ones who doubted are talking. Differently now." Harris's gaze softened. "It's the small victories, repeated enough, that change minds. One act of dignity at a time. That's lasting. That's true influence." Outside, sirens passed, distant. The world continued in motion, but within the walls there was awareness, subtle, unassuming, yet undeniable. The colleague hesitated. "Do you think it will hold?" Harris looked toward the files, then at the city spread below. "It will. Loud arrogance fades. Quiet integrity endures. People remember it. The system remembers it. And sometimes that's enough." For a long moment, neither spoke. Only the hum of the city and the weight of silent change filled the room. Harris exhaled, finally letting himself relax, knowing that restraint had become his quiet triumph, leaving a trace that no loud display could erase.